Select Board to order. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, on March 29, 2023, Governor Maura Healey signed into law an act making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for supplementing certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act includes an extension until March 31, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. This November 13, 2023 Select Board meeting will be conducted via remote participation by the board. I hereby grant permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. Is there anyone else who wishes to record the meeting? I see no affirmative responses. So good evening and welcome everyone. I am Mary Ann LeBlanc Cummings. I am the chair of the Select Board. I am joined by my colleagues on the board, Rob Gotti and Joe Previtera. He is with us. There he is.
Always in spirit, Mary Ann. Always in spirit.
Also with me on the screen, we have Christopher Coleman, our town administrator. We have Stephanie McManus, our assistant town administrator and finance director. We have Molly Keene, assistant town administrator and human resources director. We have Pat Ahern, town council. Nora Loughnane, director of community and economic development. Tish Healy, executive assistant to the town administrator, and also Alex Portillo, who is here with us from Westwood Media Center. Thank you, Alex. With that, I will head right into the chair update. First, I want to acknowledge the beautiful Veterans Day observation, which took place over the weekend, and I especially want to thank the American Legion Post 320 and all of the many town employees who made that event possible. Second, I want to advise you that the townwide overnight street parking ban will be in effect from December 1st to March 31st, which is in place to ensure that snowplows can efficiently clear roadways and emergency vehicles, and so that emergency vehicles can reach their destinations. Violators of the ban are subject to ticketing and towing. I also want to mention that the South Asian Association of Westwood is inviting the entire community to its annual Diwali Festival, the Festival of Lights, on Saturday, December 2nd at 6 p.m. at the high school. This is a family-friendly event, which will feature traditional food, dancing, and pageantry. And tickets may be purchased in advance at westwooddiwalifestival.org. Lastly, regarding the Canton Street project, as we discussed at our last meeting, we would like to form a working group to focus on the process moving forward, and we'd like to do that as soon as possible so that the working group can inform the redesign process as to design exceptions at the outset. While we have already received letters of interest from some residents, we want to encourage any other residents interested in volunteering on the working group to send an email to the board at bos@townhall.westwood.ma.us by the close of business on November 20th. That's the Monday before Thanksgiving. I'll repeat the email address: bos@townhall.westwood.ma.us. This will also be posted on the town website. The feedback I've received from a number of residents in the Canton Street neighborhood is that the working group should be a fairly small group so that it will be functional. I agree. And this will be a fully public process. Rob and Joe, does all of that sound good to you?
Marvelous.
Great. So please let us know if you are interested in volunteering for the working group. With that, I will turn it over to you, Chris, for the town administrator's update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo appreciation for all those who worked on the Veterans Day observation, and especially to members of the American Legion for their continued participation in this and for their support and the service that all the members of the military and their families have provided this country. So thank you all for that. Also want to just recap something, a very positive event that happened last week, the fire pinning ceremony that I had the pleasure of attending, and to acknowledge the great job and congratulations to all of our firefighters for their achievements and their hard work. It was a great turnout, and thank you all for your service. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. We will move to scheduled action. Our first item is a request for a one-day special wine and malt license for the New England Mountain Bike Association at Hale Catrock Field. And with us to take this on is Nora Loughnane. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you very much. We may also have Leslie Riding in the audience. I'm not sure if she's here. She is the applicant for this program. It's the New England Mountain Bike Association. And I believe this is either the second or third year. Leslie can let you know that they've done that. It's at Cat Rock at Hale Reservation, and it's scheduled for the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Sunday, November 26th. It's an all-day event beginning at 8:30 in the morning and going through 4 p.m. It involves a food service as well as alcohol. There's a food company, the Gonzalez Food Truck, who has applied for a food permit from the Health Division. And there will be 2 tips trained servers associated with this project. That we've had no problems in the past. The Alcohol Review Commission reviewed this, and they recommend unanimously that the board approve this one-day license, subject to the issuance of a food permit and public safety inspections.
Thank you, Nora. Welcome, Ms. Riding.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing your event again this year to Westwood. I'll ask my colleagues if you have any comments or questions.
No, any question is there a rain date? Is there anything else that we should be including in this?
There is no rain date scheduled.
Very good. No other questions from me.
I'm good, Maria.
Terrific. Hearing nothing else, I will entertain a motion.
All right, I move the select board grant approval of a one-day special wine and malt license for Southeast Mass New England Mountain Bike Association for their Turkey Afterburner event on Sunday, November 26th at Hale's Cat Rock Field and Pavilion with the following. 1, alcohol to be served from 8:30 to 4 p.m., contingent upon food permit issuance and public safety inspections. 2, to allow for the setup and cleanup for alcohol on the premises from 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. on November 26, 2023, and for the electronic signatures of the select board clerk to be affixed to the license.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Best of luck with the event, Ms. Riding.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Nora. Our next scheduled action is with respect to a request for a change of manager for Schulte Catering Westwood, LLC, DBA Courtyard, Boston, Dedham, Westwood. And Nora, I think you're with us on this as well. Thank you.
I am. The proposed new manager, Brian Martins, may be here in the attendees, as well as Daisy Hobgood. She is Schulte Catering's license and permit specialist. But I can get started and just let you know that so Courtyard by Marriott at University Station is operated by Schulte Catering Westwood. They operate the food and alcohol service. They notified the town back in June that their current manager at the time was resigning, and they were looking for a new manager. And the way the ABC licensing requirements are set up, as long as the entity notifies the town that its manager of record is no longer there, and the owner of the property takes responsibility for overseeing the license, they can continue to operate while they look for a new manager. So they did that. Took several months, but luckily they have finally found a manager, Brian Martins. He resides in East Boston, and he has been in the food service industry for many years. Most recently, he was the general manager at the Hilton Garden Boston Logan Airport Hotel, and he is now working at Courtyard Marriott and seeks to be named as the manager of record. The Alcohol Review Commission reviewed the application They reviewed the positive Corey report that we received and voted unanimously in favor to recommend approval of the change of manager.
Wonderful. Welcome, Mr. Martins. Any questions or comments from my colleagues?
Yes, I think we may have some bombers in the Q&A, so just so you are aware.
Okay.
I don't have any questions. Marianne.
No questions regarding Brian or Courtyard?
All right. Well, I will entertain a motion.
I move the select board approve Brian Martins as the manager of record at Courtyard, Boston, Dedham, Westwood, pending Alcohol Beverage Control Commission approval for the electronic signatures of the select board to also be affixed to the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission Licensing Authority certification form.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Mr. Martins, welcome to Westwood and best of luck in your new position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nora. All right, moving on with our scheduled action. Our next item is the FY24 tax classification hearing. So I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing at this time.
I'd like to move the select board vote to open the November 13th, 2023 fiscal year 24 tax classification public hearing for public comment.
Second.
Roll call. Joe,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. I will now turn this over to Chris Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so this is the 5-year reevaluation process. So every 5 years in Massachusetts, each community has to go through a total reevaluation process. This requires additional steps than in the prior 4 years when we just have a reevaluation. There's some additional information and some additional time that the Commonwealth needs for to process our application. So we're asking the board to postpone this to your next meeting, which is December 4th.
All right. Questions or comments, Rob or Joe?
Not from me.
So the recommendation is to continue this hearing until December 4th before we vote on that motion or bring that motion and vote on it. I do just want to open this up for any public comment. I'll just give it a moment. I'm not seeing any comments on this. So I will entertain a motion to continue this public hearing to December 4th.
I move the select board continue the fiscal year 24 tax classification public hearing to the select board meeting on December 4th at 7 p.m. via Zoom.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much. Our next scheduled action is a discussion of the Islington Center redevelopment traffic signal timing study. And with us again is Nora Loughnane.
Thank you. We also have Ken Cram, who is from Bayside Engineering. He is the traffic engineer for the Islington Center redevelopment project. And we have Dennis Flynn from Beta Group, who is the town's peer review engineer for that same project. This, as board members will recall, has been before the select board in the past. Back in 2018, the planning board granted a special permit under the flexible multiple use overlay district section of the zoning bylaw for the Islington Center redevelopment project. And one of the conditions of the board's decision, condition 3 of that decision, required that the applicant come back to the select board for consideration of signalization changes at Islington Center. There was a desire during the discussion that occurred at the public hearing in 2018. There was a desire among several residents who spoke out at that hearing for a dedicated left turn arrow from southbound Washington Street onto eastbound East Street. At that time, Bayside Engineering and Beta Engineering both reviewed the traffic counts for 2018, and looking at the projections, I believe they were out to 2025, and they did not at that time feel that the numbers justified a dedicated left-hand turn, but they thought the best thing to do would be to wait until the project was ready to open and then look at new traffic counts. The original intent was for that to be done prior to a certificate of occupancy. Due to the pandemic and changes in the traffic conditions, when the building was ready for occupancy, the applicant came back and asked the board to delay that traffic study a little bit further to allow traffic to pick up again, to allow the building to be fully occupied. So we were before the board, I believe it was in 2021, and then again last late, I forget if it was November or December of 2022, asking for one further extension. The board granted an extension until December 1st of this year for the traffic study to be completed and for an analysis to be brought to the board. So we're now at that point. Ken Cram from Bayside Engineering has produced new traffic counts and new traffic analysis, and it has been peer reviewed by Dennis Flynn of Beta. So if you'd like to hear first an introduction of the report by Ken and then a response to it by Dennis, that might be appropriate.
I think that's an excellent plan. Welcome, Mr. Cram. Welcome, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you. Okay, Ken Cram from Bayside Engineering. We've been involved with the project from day one, performing all the necessary traffic analyses to help get the project permitted. I got to step back and say, you know, I'm a little proud of this project and what it's done to Islington Center. I've been there several times, and I think it's just been a boon to the town of Westwood. But anyhow, moving on, we did collect new traffic counts at the intersection of Washington Street, School Street, and East Street in October of this past year. We did counts in the morning, we did counts in the evening, and we did counts during the Saturday midday peak period to make sure we covered the 3 times when traffic volumes would most likely peak the most. We did a series of analyses and existing conditions analyses, and we also looked, we didn't just look at existing, we went out future as well. Again, 7-year horizon, planning horizon. Using our first set of analyses was based on the existing timing and phasing that's out there today for both existing and future conditions. And then we did a series of analyses where we looked at changing the phasing to what we call lead lag, where initially the northbound Washington Street approach would get an advanced phase when no one else is going, and then the northbound and southbound would go, and then ultimately at the end, only the southbound would be allowed to go. We did that for a series of cycle lengths from 90 seconds up to 150 second cycles, 150 seconds of cycle length. And just one thing, keep in mind as I'm going through this, one of the things we try and balance is we want to get the best operation we can, but we also don't want to have extremely long queues. Sometimes with longer cycle lengths, you will get better operations overall, but you sacrifice and get longer queues. So rule of thumb is the shorter the cycle length, the shorter your queues will be. So we submitted this, and our initial conclusion based on the initial study was with today's volumes post-COVID, the existing operations that's out there today is the current best operations for that intersection. As Nora indicated, Beta was hired to peer review, and they asked us to do a supplemental analysis where basically what we did was we took away one through lane in each direction to be able to put in an exclusive left turn lane. and then run that analysis again for 90 seconds, 120 seconds, and 150-second cycle. And the operations did not improve at all. And as a matter of fact, the vehicle queues under that system were extremely longer than what we currently observed. One of the other comments Beta asked us to look at and prepare was a graphic to compare our original projections from 2025 to the current volumes right now. And no one could have predicted the pandemic and its impacts. Today volumes are still lower than they were pre-pandemic. We've seen them come back in some areas, but most of the areas they are still down. And so the volumes, again, when we looked at that comparison, showed that the volumes were still lower, but the intersection is really operating at its optimal peak right now. We were able to we got extremely lucky here. That signal originally was a signal that was designed and installed by Mass DOT. I want to say back in the 70s, maybe 80s, I don't know, but we were able to find some plans from Mass DOT for that intersection. But unfortunately, what those plans did not have was enough information for us to be able to perform a structural analysis if any changes were to be made, or if any new signage was to be hung on the mast arms, or any new signal heads were to be hung on the mast arms. We could not do a structural analysis and stamp a set of plans and say it was safe. Currently, I've observed the signals, and from my limited knowledge as a traffic engineer, not a structural engineer, we have structural engineers here at our office who did that review for me. And they said without having more information, they would not recommend hanging anything else on the mast arms. But we have done most of the other measures that were originally required as part of the approval of the project. So I know I've probably given you a lot of information, and I'll be glad to answer any questions, or perhaps Dennis can, Mr. Flynn from Beta may want to weigh in before we get into Q&A.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Flynn, and then we'll have some questions.
Sure, thank you. Yes, Dennis Flynn with Beta, and thank you, Ken. I thought that was a good summary of the work that has been done to date, I know over several years. So I don't really have too much to add to this. Initially, I just start off by saying, we felt that the procedures, the analysis, and the task that Bayside had undertook and Ken was appropriate. We agreed with their approach, and really just sort of the bottom line. When we look at the original analysis, we carry that forward to the analysis that was recently conducted with the updated traffic volumes. Our conclusion remains the same, that southbound lag phase that Ken was describing is still not warranted. And furthermore, when Bayside provided the comparison of the projected volumes from, I believe it was 2018 up to 2025, comparing those to what was just counted just last month. So very recent. Overall, sort of across all the movements, really, it's lower. The demand at the intersection, not just from one individual approach, but most of the movements are lower, and that includes that southbound left turn. That is reduced in demand. So with that reduction and the additional analysis performed, our recommendation, our conclusion remains the same. So
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cram and Mr. Flynn. I do have some questions about the methodology that went into the traffic counts. I guess I should address this to you, Mr. Cram. First of all, I understand that traffic counts were taken on Thursday, October 12th, and Saturday, October 14th. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I note that Thursday, October 12th was a weekday that followed a Monday holiday. And I'm just wondering, based on your education and experience as a traffic engineer, whether traffic during the week of a holiday is generally lower for commuters?
It depends on the holiday, but typically, um, Indigenous Peoples' Day, as it is now being called, has not been one of those major holidays. And I have, not seen a significant drop off on weeks when we do counts when around that time of year. Obviously, Christmas or Thanksgiving, yes, no counts during those weeks. But this would be appropriate for this week.
Is there any data that you're aware of to suggest that traffic is lower in weeks where there is a holiday for commuters?
Only personal observation.
Okay. Now, with respect to the traffic volumes, the data that was collected, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, were the manual turning movement counts and vehicle classification counts. Is that right?
Correct.
And those were the only two pieces of data that were collected here. Is that correct?
Oh, we counted cars, we counted trucks, we counted any bicycles or pedestrians that were traversed through the intersection.
Okay.
As with every standard TMC, as we call them.
Okay. So manual turning movement counts refers to the number of vehicles that are actually making it through the intersection, whether it be, making a right-hand turn, a left-hand turn, what have you. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
All right. And then the vehicle classification counts, that has to do with what type of vehicle is moving through the intersection.
Correct.
Okay. And in the data that was provided to us with respect to existing conditions, there was some data provided with respect to the delays seen at each of the various points moving through the intersection. Is that right?
Are you referring to the levels of service calculations?
Yes, sir.
Yes. What we do is we take that data, the manual turning movement counts. We find out which we counted from 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6:30 in the evening, and I think it was 10:30 to 1:30 on a Saturday. And what we do is we take the 4 consecutive 15-minute intervals that represent the highest amount of volume in that period to represent the individual peak hour. And during that, so we have all the appropriate factors. We know how many heavy vehicles there are, say making a left turn or a right turn or going through on Washington Street. And we take that information. We have our plans, which tell us, okay, we have 2 through lanes permitting left and right turns. On the eastbound, on the East Street approach, we have a left turn lane and a through right turn lane. School Street being a single lane, which permitting left through and right turn movements. And we take those factors, we take the geometry, and we have software packages. In this case, we use a model called Synchro, which is accepted by Mass DOT as an accepted software analysis tool. And we put all the information in with the observed signal timing and phasing, and it does a myriad of mathematical calculations for us. If we had to do all these calculations by hand, it'd take us a year to do a traffic study these days. So it does all those calculations, and then what we get out of those calculations is the calculated delay per approach, and then it adds it all up and divides to make it an average over the entire intersection to give us what the overall intersection calculated delay would be. And as traffic engineers, we use that number. There's a ranking, A through F, A being good, F being bad, tied to a range of delays that tell us how the intersection operates. And that's how we as traffic engineers grade the intersections.
Thank you. And what was the calculated delay for the southbound lane that we're talking about here in peak weekday morning and evening times?
for existing conditions.
Yes, sir.
I gotta find the right table.
I think it's table 3. Oh, no, that's future.
That's future, table 2. In the weekday morning, the southbound calculated delay was 20.1 seconds. In the evening, it was 26.5 seconds. And on Saturday, it was 20.8 seconds. And that's calculated, that's an average. It's not, it's not the highest, it's not the lowest. But that's what the calculated average would be.
Okay. And so just to be clear, and again, many of us here aren't engineers like you are. What was not done here was actual observation of what the delay is for folks trying to make that left-hand turn from Washington Street onto East Street. Fair?
Well, we do go out there, and I was out there during the Saturday midday peak period and actually observed the delays that were experienced on all approaches. I mean, we did not sit there and actually physically measure what they actually are, correct? But we observed what, to make sure that when we do our analyses, what we observe in the field and what we get from mathematical results from the model makes sense and match each other. And based on my observations, they do.
Were observations made during the weekday morning and evening commutes?
Yes.
All right. Well, at this point, I want to turn it over to my colleagues. I have some other follow-up, but I'll open it up to my colleagues at this point. Rob, Joe?
Yep. Quick question. You referred to, Mr. Cram, the queue length and wanting to ensure that stays within certain tolerances, and you did have a measure of queue length, and based on what it looked like, we were sort of right in the middle of what I would call the bell curve of expected queue length. Is that a reasonable interpretation of what I saw in table 2?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And the other thing related to queue length, if that gets too long, does that also coincide with an increased incident in any public safety accidents, anything like that? Do we have any data that would sort of, one way or the other, provide any indication of, why additional queue length is problematic beyond just traffic?
We have no evidence of that at this time. And no reported issues.
Okay, thank you.
Marion, I have a couple of questions. As you know, this has been near and dear to my heart and many other people here in Islington Center. Let me just, Ken, you said, I want to make sure I got this right. Best operation without extremely long queues, correct? That's what you were shooting for?
That's what we typically try and get when we look at retiming a signal.
All right. Marianne, I just want to play a 10-second clip from the May 18th, 2018 town meeting when this was discussed, with your permission. Again, maybe I won't.
Use building would all allow our residents to park there if necessary. New traffic signals, and this is something that I think has been overlooked. There will be new traffic signals, including a left-hand turn from Washington Street onto East Street. So if you're coming down Washington Street, you understand that right now there is no designated left turn, and you kind of take your life in your hands as you try to make that turn. There would be a new light, a dedicated time to turn left onto the East Street.
So Ken, I'm looking at this a little bit differently. That was something that was promised to the residents at that town meeting that the select board would deliver. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I had someone with a little more experience than I have take a look at this. And the first thing he told me is, this study is solely for efficiency, nothing to do with safety. Correct? It's all about timing.
It's all about the timing, correct?
Right. But
That
you
was the
heard
exercise.
but you heard the chair of the select board stating that taking your life into your hands getting through that intersection. So Mike, I have a couple of questions. First of all, so if you're not aware of this, the traffic is now going down Dean Ave, Stratford Road into East Street. And up until we changed the clocks, we used to watch the cars race down Dean Ave. So we're taking the cars off of Washington Street and we're putting them into a neighborhood in Islington. So I'm going to advocate that we do put in a left turn signal because I'm going to shoot for safety over the timing. And the fact the select board promises to the residents, we ought to be good to our word and make sure we do it right. Again, it's all about timing. Rob, I understand about the queues, but I'm concerned about shooting traffic to a neighborhood. And the chair of the select board said himself, taking your life into your hands to make a left-hand turn. Ken, can you tell me what the downside is from a safety perspective if we put in a left turn signal? And keeping in mind, I want to frame this within the left turn signal that turns into Roach Brothers a block away. So what's the difference?
Are you, okay, let's just back up 1 second. When you say you want to put in a left turn signal, does that mean you also, so you want to have a dedicated left turn lane?
I never said anything about a lane, Ken. I'm not
Okay,
sure.
I'm just trying to be clear. I'm just trying to be clear and understand. Because you could put a lagging phase in. I do not believe it will do it. The analysis shows you will not get a significant improvement over existing conditions. However,
then you haven't made a left-hand turn there. You can't
Yes, I have.
You can't go till the light turns red. And you have to race through there. I'm concerned about a young driver trying to race through that intersection when the light's red. We can handle a little longer queues, but I'll advocate for safety.
If I could pick up on that, I think, Mr. Cram, what we're talking about is that, the experience residents have is that they're in line, and only after the light basically turns red can you make that left turn, one car at a time. Tonight, by the way, I know you gave us the delay times. I went through that intersection tonight, and the delay for me was 3 minutes and 10 seconds to get through that and make that turn tonight at 5:15 p.m. And I understand that some observations were made, but am I correct that we have no data in terms of what the actual wait time is for folks trying to make that turn based on this study? Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
I'd be interested in seeing that data, so that we really, and I understand that you've used the models that are appropriate, the computer modeling, but I think, as Joe said, the experience of residents is far, far longer than 26.5 seconds, and it does become dicey at best. I would like to see actual data on the wait times to do that. And I also want to mention that we have ongoing projects at 22 Everett Street and 190 Washington Street, which are expected to impact volume in that neighborhood. Actually, Nora, I'd love to hear from you on this.
So the planning board approved a project at 190 Washington Street over the summer, and that project I think was probably about 18 months out. 22 Everett Street is currently before the planning board. Construction will probably be completed sometime in 2025, assuming it receives its special permit approval. So any traffic that's forecasted here is forecasted through 2030, with those two projects in mind, but it's not actual counts, which we will be able to have once those projects are actually up and running.
We have gotten a few resident comments. So
Mary,
Joe,
before you go to those, can I
Yeah.
just ask one other?
I have another
yes.
question. I have another
of
question.
course, please,
Sure.
sorry.
So one is I'd be interested in seeing more of the data of the actual delay in making that time, that turn. And then Joe, the reason I was raising the queues is actually related to what you were saying. Longer queues between Waze, Apple Maps, people's just desire to get around longer queues could exacerbate the problem of cut throughs as opposed to make it better. So I think if we're going to address that, there may be a different way of addressing that than the turn signal, but I agree that the safety issue is one that needs to be considered.
And Marianne, Ken, I just didn't hear your answer what the difference is between the left turn onto East Street and the left turn into the Roach Brothers parking lot. What's the difference between those two intersections? Why does one have a left turn and why does one not?
I don't have an answer for that because both those signals, we were not involved with the design of those. I do not know why there is an advance phase for the left turn into Roach Brothers. Probably because the volumes. If I were to I could probably look at our older 2018 counts. I would bet that the left turn into Roach Brothers is significantly higher than the southbound left turn from Washington onto East Street.
More cars are turning into Roach Brothers than going down East Street.
Than turning left onto East Street from Washington Street.
But the cars turning onto East Street were double the number turning onto School Street. Is that correct?
Repeat that.
The numbers turning onto East Street were nearly twice, well, sometimes more than double turning onto School Street, except for on the weekends. The weekends was a wash. But all of the other times, in the morning peak hour, there were 21 more cars turning onto East Street than onto School Street. In the evening hour, there were 29 more cars. And on Saturday, midday peak, 4. In the evening, Ken, you had us down for 17 more cars turning onto East Street than School. And in the evening, which is what Mary Ann's referring to, there are 32 more cars turning onto East Street than onto School Street. I think the actual number was 65, which is why it took her 3 minutes to get through the intersection.
Let me, if I may, just want to bring in a couple of comments from residents. Let's see. I've got to ask folks, there are a couple folks here who have not put in their addresses. We need your address in order to read your comments. So please put that in, the folks who have put comments in, but I do see one from Stephen Olenoff, 52 Glandor Road. I have examined the traffic study. The study is solely for efficiency of the traffic lights, that is, how congestion is affected by changing the cycle times or adding the left turn signal. The study does not examine the improvement in traffic safety that would be achieved by adding the left turn signal. The study does show that adding the left turn signal would increase delays slightly in some directions and reduce delays in other directions at different times. Overall, it would actually reduce delays in the morning, increase them slightly in the evening, and cause almost no change on weekends. Although improvements in traffic safety were not measured in the study, it is very clear that the added left turn signal would provide both increased traffic safety and the perception of increased safety and ease of use, all without any significant increase in delays or traffic congestion. Therefore, the left turn signal should be added to the intersection. Okay, and we have a comment from Cynthia Butters, 63 Cobley Street, Westwood. She writes, "We are very concerned that this issue has taken so long to address. As residents of 52 years, we find this is a very dangerous intersection. We do not feel safe making a left turn from Route 1A to East Street. Regards, Alan and Cynthia Butters." There's a comment from John Cummings for Chickadee Lane. "I agree with Joe. The safety concern is 100% real." From Washington, "Is there any reason why there couldn't be a left lane turn light onto East Street? At the same time, there is a left turn light onto School Street. The left turn onto School Street already exists." And Mr. Usalian, if you could please put your address in, I can read your comments, but I'm not seeing your address. All right. I'd like to see more data on this, and I'm also concerned about the other projects coming online and how that may impact traffic. Rob and Joe, what do you think about those questions?
I'll support the idea of getting more data. I believe those two other projects, though, are factored in per what Nora said, in terms of the projections through 25 or through 2030. So I'm less concerned about the impact of those two, but the difference between what the model says and what the actual experience is from a delay standpoint is one that I would certainly support seeing more data before making a decision. I believe Dennis had his hand up earlier.
If I may, yes, Dennis with Beta. I just wanted to offer a little bit more perspective. You know, some of the comments being raised, which I certainly understand, and certainly good comments. The one thing I'll try to highlight and describe as best as I can with the phasing and the idea of including a southbound left turn similar. I assume we're talking about something similar to what is proposed in the northbound direction. And the way the phasing and the analysis was conducted was such that we have a northbound, what's called advance. So the northbound approach is a green, including a green arrow. That green arrow then goes from yellow, and then we just have the green ball indications, and the southbound traffic then goes. So they run concurrently. Following that is what Ken was describing as a southbound lag. The one safety concern we have about the southbound lag is if you're a northbound vehicle and you're wanting to make a left turn during the period where the southbound traffic is also running concurrently, so you have to make what's called a permitted left. It's not protected. Well, when this lag comes in, you see, preceding the lag is you see a yellow and then you see a red. Now, the expectation of the driver heading northbound when they see a yellow and a red is that the southbound is also seeing a yellow and a red, and then they can make the turn on red, where in fact the southbound will continue to receive green. So this is referred to as a left turn trap. I think it's something I believe I had to double check the 2018 report that we had raised a concern with this particular configuration. And the only way to avoid that is we'd have to designate the left lanes as exclusive left turn lanes. And I believe we did have a comment, Ken, to run that analysis, which it did show increased delays, increased queues by doing that. But that is our concern about introducing, if we did this lead lag phasing. And I shouldn't say the only way to avoid it. The other way to do that is you just run northbound by itself, you stop it, you just run southbound by itself, and then eastbound, westbound, which that'll add we expect that would add additional delay as well. So I just wanted to highlight that there is a potential safety concern with doing that lead lag of what we call that left turn trap. If that makes any sense, I know it's, yes.
Dennis, Ken, I just want to elaborate on one of the comments that came in. That was, why couldn't there be a concurrent left turn with the current left turn on the northbound side of Washington Street up to School Street if you ran a concurrent left turn onto East Street while those two arrows were going? You wouldn't have any conflict, nor would that seemingly contribute to delay.
Well, I think we'd have to, if I'm understanding that comment correctly, I believe we'd have to make the left turn lanes exclusive left turn lanes, meaning they couldn't allow the through movement as well.
No. Marianne?
I think you would.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Rob. Dennis, what Rob just described is the intersection of Common Street, I'm sorry, High Street and Court Street in Dedham. And shoot, man, I see people going through that intersection every day doing just fine. 2 miles down the road, it's successful.
Right.
Right, it's just 2 miles. I'm not talking about across the city. 2 miles down the road is what Rob described.
Right. Well, I'm not familiar with that intersection. Certainly be more than happy to take a look at it. I guess I'm just a little confused as to what we're trying to describe here of running concurrent protected lefts, right? So left turns in both directions are going at the same time and they're protected. That means we could not allow the through vehicles to go at the same time or we'd have a conflict. I may be misunderstanding and I'd be
Yeah, no,
certainly
I think you're right with respect to they would need to be dedicated left turn lanes. I think that's probably a correct assumption. So the you know, at least from, because if you have somebody who is going straight through in that southbound left, what would, you know, what we're talking about is a left turn only. If it were not a left turn only and they were going through, you'd have the same problem that exists today because they're allowed to be there to go straight. But if you made that a dedicated left turn lane only, and then you had the northbound going onto School Street and the southbound going onto East Street at the same time, then I think you may alleviate some of the problem without adding to the delay. That's just, I thought that was an interesting suggestion.
And Dennis, I don't want you to get the wrong idea.
Sure.
High Street and Court is not simultaneous left turns. First, the northbound people go, then there's that lag, and then the other side goes. But they seem to negotiate it without adding another lane. I don't think we need another lane down there. But we do need something to protect the drivers when they make that left-hand turn. I think that's paramount, and get the cars out of the neighborhood.
If I could just point out one thing, there would not be, under any circumstances, would there be an additional lane. It would be a question of taking an existing lane and stopping through traffic in that lane, whether that's the northbound or southbound. The lanes that are currently used for left turns allow both left turns and through traffic. So if we were going to have simultaneous left turn signals, we would not be adding another lane to the roadway width. We would be taking that left lane that is there now, making it a dedicated left, and then you would only have one lane in either direction for through traffic.
Thanks, Nora. We have one more comment on this from Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane. How did I know the findings would have no need for a left lane light? Was this process vetted? Well, the process was vetted in that the work was performed by Bayside, and then a peer review was performed by Beta, Mr. Flynn's firm. With that, I'm going to suggest that we ask that we get some actual data about what the lag times are for the turns, particularly the left turn we're talking about, so that we have a better understanding.
If we're going to get that data, Marianne, might we also get a study performed on dedicated left turn lanes in both directions, and what type of impact that might have? Because, you know, if so, in theory, it sounds great. I just want to make sure that in practice that it actually doesn't make the problem worse. I saw Ken at one point had his hand raised. You know, conceptually, I think that could be really interesting. I would want to make sure that the engineers agree that the data says that this is what's going to happen.
I think that's a great suggestion. Joe, are you? Oh, you're on mute, Joe.
I just want Ken and Dennis to keep in mind that when you go travel 500 feet north of this intersection is a MBTA booth, and I thoroughly enjoyed during the summer sitting in that booth and watching the cars race from 2 lanes down to 1. So it is 1 lane coming up to it, if we have to go that route. That's all, Marion.
Okay. Well, I think, Rob, if you're up to making a motion on this.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rob. Looks like I just do want to read one more comment. I'm sorry. This person put in his address. Gary Usalian, 9 Adams Street. He just wrote, the engineers should look at traffic going down Dean Ave onto Stratford Road and who is cutting through the neighborhood to avoid the light. Taking a left at that light is not trivial. I wanted to get that because we were just waiting on his address. Go ahead, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, with respect to motion on this. I would move that the developer perform additional studies to study both the actual delays of making that left turn from Washington Street to East Street, as well as performing a traffic study of synchronized dedicated left lane turns onto School Street from the northbound side of Washington Street and to East Street on the southbound side of Washington Street. Is that an adequate motion, Mr. Counsel?
Could
For
I
me,
ask,
but I would ask the members of the select board if it's adequate.
could I just point out one thing? The last time the board made a decision here, you set a date of December 1st, 2023 for implementation of any new signalization. So if you wouldn't mind adding to that motion, further extending that date so that these studies could then lead to implementation if that's the select board's desire at some future date.
I would actually want to add some timing to that motion for when that study should be complete as well. So before I complete the motion, do I have some idea of what the time frame is for conducting that? I see Ken has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Ken.
2 things, Mr. Gotti. We did do that analysis that you asked for. That was one of the questions that Beta asked us to do in our response to the comments document, which we did do that analysis and we submitted it last Friday. The other question, and I'd have to give this some serious thought. Right now we're running into primary holiday season. And I think I'd have to give some serious thought as to using counts conducted before Christmas. And obviously we would not do counts between Christmas and New Year's. We may have to wait till January to get a reasonable assessment, but I would like to discuss that with Dennis offline and find out, what would be an appropriate time frame. Unfortunately, we have a long, I can't just snap my fingers and tell someone to go out there and do more counts. We have firms that do this work for us, and it takes 2 to 3 weeks sometimes just to collect that data. That's all.
Okay, for my clarification, and I assume for that of my colleagues, when you say that was done, what is that was done that you're referring to? Because I think that the idea of concurrent left-hand turns seemed to be a novel concept this evening.
As I understand, the analysis was if we had left turn lanes on northbound, southbound Washington Street, and we took that lane from the existing middle, so to speak, and we had 1 through lane per direction.
Yeah, but I believe those were presumed to be delayed signalizations in each direction, right? A right turn onto onto East Street from Washington Street on the northbound side, and a left turn onto East Street from Washington Street southbound. So I don't know that there was the concurrent concept of the left turns.
No, I'm pretty sure it was concurrent. Because we had the volumes, believe it or not, when you look at the volumes, northbound and southbound, they're relatively close. And so it makes sense to run if you had the appropriate geometry, a left turn lane, for example, an exclusive left turn lane, it makes sense at that point to run them concurrently and not to have lead lag phasing because the volumes are so closely balanced together. And then you give the rest of the time that's needed to either the through movements northbound, southbound, or your side street movements, East Street and School Street.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the lead lag that you were talking about in the study that we saw, where it was a right-hand turn off the northbound side of Washington Street onto East Street, is necessary even if you have the concurrence left turns, because you need the safe passage when you're making that right or left turn. They need a dedicated time to make that turn. Am I understanding you correctly there?
Under that construction scenario, yes. But there is no dedicated right turn lane northbound.
Yeah, correct. But was that part of the proposal or study, or I felt like maybe I misinterpreted something.
No, we did not do that analysis because there would simply be no room to put in a right turn, an exclusive right turn lane northbound right there in front of the fire station.
Not exclusive right turn, but the idea of being able to make the right turn as an arrow, right? I guess you're still.
Because it's a shared lane. You have through movements in that lane and you have right turn movements in that lane. And granted, it's a fairly heavy right turn volume, yes, but there are still through movements in that right turn lane. And plus you combine with the fact you have an apex driveway to the fire station right there at the intersection. And that stop bar is so far back to allow for the fire department to have safe access when they need it. I would not recommend having a right turn over. What's called a right turn overlap is the technical terminology. I would not recommend that in this case.
Before I continue with any motions, I want to, first of all, are my colleagues satisfied that what we have addresses the second half of the motion that was about to be made? So that's question one for the two of you. And then the second part is, if yes, then we're only talking about, some type of observed data on delay to either. So I want to put that back to the two of you for further questions before I continue any motion.
Yeah, and perhaps it would be helpful, Mr. Cram, if you could just point out the page number where that analysis appears, so that we're all literally on the same page.
I can read to you from the report that was produced on November 10th. So this is Mr. Cram's supplemental letter to the original report. If you turn to page 5, at the bottom of that page, it states an analysis with this modified lane configuration using the future 2030 traffic volumes with permitted and protected phasing for left turns northbound and southbound was performed, and the results are summarized in table 2 for future conditions. Table 2 is on page 6. The capacity analysis worksheets are included in the appendix. And you can see table 2, and there's a statement at the end of table 2 that says comparing the results in both tables 1 and 2 shows that if the Washington Street lane geometry is modified to consist of an exclusive left turn lane and a through lane permitting right turns, the overall level of service drop and the vehicle queues in the through lane increase dramatically. Bayside would not recommend this lane configuration.
Okay. Well, I think to your point, Rob, I think we've got consensus, but we need to vote that we'd like to get more data on what the actual delays are for that left turn southbound. So I know you made a motion, but it hadn't been seconded.
I'm gonna rescind that and
Yeah.
start over.
Okay.
Before I do that, what type of additional specificity do we need to ask for with respect to the form that study takes? So the model produces traffic and signalization delay and all of that and queuing. So what is it that we're asking for so that I may make this motion as specific as possible for to make sure that what we get back is what we were expecting to get back.
And perhaps let me bring in Dennis on this as our peer reviewer. I think you get the gist of our conversation here, what it is that we're trying to determine. So can you help us out with some parameters for what we're trying to achieve here, which is to really make sure that we're truly understanding the flow of traffic and as it impacts safety in that intersection.
Sure. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing, hopefully I'm getting this right, is it's more about an observed or measured delay versus what the analysis results, the capacity analysis that was performed is showing us. So I think it's really observed, measured delay, and frankly, if this is going to be something undertaken, it's worth probably observing the back of queue if there's going to be people out there doing this. So these are sort of just physically measuring the actual delay over, I would say, during what we've identified as the peak hours.
And could I ask, Dennis, also, people have been mentioning the safety issue. And so just anecdotally, what happens to us is we get out there, it's green, now it's red. But that's the only time you can go and you're already out there and then one turn goes. So that's, one of the safety issues there. How can we, as traffic engineers, how can you capture that kind of safety issue in making observations?
So it's difficult, honestly, truthfully. The challenge is a lot of times when the engineers will evaluate safety, the first thing you start with is the data and what's happening in terms of crash history or accident history, and that doesn't necessarily that's just actual collisions that occur. So perception, term used, near misses or comfortability is not really captured in that. So I think as part of the observations, there could be a specific focus on the left turn vehicles and what is actually happening with them. I heard some comments that really anybody making a left turn is sort of sitting there kind of halfway in the intersection and cannot make that maneuver until the yellow and the red or the clearance time. So and the reason I would say that the analysis is not showing bad results or actually showing favorable results is because you have such a low demand in terms of what was counted lefts. So they really can be processed, that demand. So it's like one vehicle every 2 minutes. You can process that in an hour just on your yellow and red time. So that's why we're not seeing, high levels of service calculations. But there's obviously a limitation as to what that analysis can tell us. So I think as part of the observations, it would really maybe just be an understanding of when the lefts, are, when there is a left turn, southbound left turn present. When is their maneuver being made? Is it being made? Is there a gap being found during the green interval, or are these vehicles, like I said, it's only going to be one every couple of minutes based on the traffic, turning moving counts. Are they only able to get through the intersection during yellow and red?
So I think we're talking about the observed measured delay as well as when the maneuvers are being made relative to the light cycle.
Right. Yeah, the safety part of it is difficult, and it's sort of just kind of more or less based on the observation, and sometimes that observation isn't consistent with the user experience, where someone's, oh well, they made it through on the yellow and red. I know that's not ideal, but they were able to go. But an individual user may be very stressed out by that maneuver. feeling they have to accelerate through the intersection. So even though from a capacity standpoint, given I'm kind of repeating myself, so I apologize, the number of left turns that were counted, you can process them really almost exclusively through those what's called change in clearance times, yellow and red. It is, it is preferred or more ideal if some of these vehicles can find gaps. And I think part of the challenge is just the northbound traffic during the peak hours. I think, Ken, you alluded to it. There's a very high right turn. So you're going across 2 lanes with one of those lanes, a lot of, one of those lanes probably just seeing through traffic and the other one seeing obviously the rights are going to be in that right turn lane. So there's a decent demand. So it's not necessarily surprising that most of that left turn is happening during yellow and red. But yeah, I think it would just, the best we can really do from an observation standpoint is just sort of understand what of the left turns are we observing, pretty much all of them, most of them, some percentage of them making that maneuver on yellow and red, and leading to a potential safety issue.
Dennis, is video ever used in helping perform such an analysis to be able to sort of cross-reference what the model says to what is seen, observed to be happening?
All our counts these days are done by video.
Okay.
Dennis, would you be able to stratify the cars that go through red, yellow, and a separate number of cars that go through a red light to make that turn?
I think that is part of the observations. The person doing it, the video, I think, would be a little bit more difficult if you just set up a video camera and you didn't necessarily have eyes on both the vehicles and the traffic signals. So someone physically being out there observing could be paying, with that direction, paying attention to that. Observe specifically the left turns and when do they make the maneuver. Do they make it during a green? They find the gap. Do they make it during the yellow? Or do they make it during the red? I mean, that's something you could observe and quantify. Yeah, and I guess the other is, from the observer standpoint, it's hard. Can you quantify something as a near miss? Because I think we'll all have sort of a different definition of that. If it looks like the maneuvering is very challenging, I mean, it's hard to describe exactly what that means, but I think we all felt that way where we make more sort of an aggressive left turn. It's not a, sort of just a free flowing natural maneuver, but if it looks like they're just sort of aggressively moving, or, another point would be, is there somebody who's in the middle of the intersection and just physically doesn't make it? I don't know if folks have observed that the yellow, the red comes and all of a sudden it's green for the conflicting for the conflicting direction.
Ken, just a clarifying question, because I heard you say video is used for all your traffic studies. So is there video that exists which would mean you could use that to perform the delay or analysis that we're talking about, or would this need to be a return to the intersection? I'm not clear, because I want to make sure I make the right motion.
No, yeah, yes, it was video. I could get that from the counters, but I'd have to see what angle the camera was aligned with to pick up the intersection. I mean, if it was predominantly pointing southbound, then the answer is probably no. If it's predominantly pointing northbound and we can see the end of the queue in each cycle, then I think we're okay. But and that's the first thing I'll look at, sometime this week.
So would it be reasonable then, if we're making a motion, Madam Chair, to put a time frame for this, to say, by March 1st or April 1st, to allow for, reasonable traffic, non-holiday related traffic to be studied? And then if we were to say March 1st, then I think that gives reasonable amount of time to perform this outside the holiday window. I don't know if that's.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, given, there is going to be a lag time just to get in the queue, no pun intended, for the work done. And we've got Thanksgiving, the holidays, weather.
So alternatively, we could go for February 1st and call it 10 weeks from today or something like that.
Sounds good. I think
Okay.
February 1st sounds great. Joe?
Sure, it's only been 5 years.
You have your hand up, Joe, I see.
Yes, I want to make sure High and Court Street, Dennis, is the intersection that I was referring to. And would it be possible to get a count of how many light cycles a driver has to sit at before they can turn? Thanks, Rob.
All right, I think we're ready to move this.
Okay, I would move that we ask Bayside to conduct additional observations of the actual traffic delay and do so, I guess, with both human count and video if possible. Sounds like they're going to do that anyway. And that be done by February 1st for presentation. Have we scheduled our February meeting yet? I don't have that in front of me. Tish, is there a date that I can give for presentation back to the select board? Or I'll just say to be completed by February 1st and presented at the first opportunity to the select board after conclusion of the study.
That's probably better for now.
Okay.
Could I make a friendly amendment to that, Rob?
Please.
To include a study of when the left turns in the southbound direction of Washington Street, when those turns are being made relative to the light cycle.
I accept your friendly amendment.
All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second the amendment and second the motion.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, roll call. Joe?
Madam
Aye.
Chair,
Oh, yes, Pat.
there was additional comment in the Q&A.
Oh, thank you. There is an additional comment from Cynthia Butters. I read her address earlier. She writes, please don't delay action on this matter. A decision has been put off for too many years. The sooner, the better. I think I've now reached all of the comments. Thank you, Pat. All right, so the motion has been made and seconded. Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Mr. Cram, Mr. Flynn, thank you very much for all of your work to date, and we look forward to discussing this with you again after the first of the year.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Nora, for all your work on this. All right, moving back to our agenda, new business. We have a financial update with Stephanie. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. So I just have what I'm hoping to try to be a quick financial update, but it might have a lot of detail. So if you have any questions as I go through, please feel free to interrupt. Otherwise, at the end, we can just discuss any questions you have. So the town has a responsibility to manage public funds and provide quality services while complying with certain financial standards and regulations. To that end, the select board, as you know, established a set of financial policies that was most recently updated in 2022. So tonight, this is just a list, which I've recently discussed at a FinCom meeting, but I just wanted to put it up here, of the financial policies I usually highlight when I go through them. But tonight, I'm going to be focusing on giving an update on the status of the current reserve balances, and then switch to focusing on the town's current debt status and how it's related to our financial policies for debt. So I'll just point out on here, when I say reserve funds, the update I'm giving is on Free cash, which I gave an update recently. I just want to go back to that and remind everyone of where we are. Our stabilization fund, our capital improvement stabilization fund, and then our meals and hotel tax fund. I'm also going to be talking about our debt policies, as I said, which is related to what we call non-exempt debt, which I'll get into later, which is not to exceed 8% of the net general fund revenue, as well as our total general fund debt, which is not to exceed the cap of 12% of our net general fund revenue. So related to free cash, per our financial policies, we reserve 4% of our general fund revenue, operating budget revenue, net of debt service. We try to keep that target as unallocated free cash. As I had given an update recently, that amount for our free cash per DOR was certified as of July 1st of 2023 at just under $11 million. So our financial policies do state that free cash in excess of that 4% reserve goal shall not be used to fund operating budget expenditures or assist with any budget shortfalls, but should really be utilized for unforeseen circumstances. An example of that is snow and ice costs that we might have overages on. That has been done through Article 2 a number of times in the past, as well as additional capital projects. It can be used to build our stabilization reserves, which we do on an annual basis through town meeting, as well as fund one-time miscellaneous town meeting articles. So this chart right here just shows what I like to call a history, a snapshot of the last couple of years and what we've been certified at from DOR each fiscal year at the beginning. What in this chart right over here from FY18 to FY22 shows what was actually utilized at town meeting, the total amounts, and then what we call unallocated after those reserves were approved at town meeting. Over here in this column is what was certified as of July 1st. And then I have also filled in what I'm calling estimated projections of what we are anticipating allocating throughout this upcoming budget cycle. So when we look to FY25, these are the numbers that we are projecting. And after those amounts would be used, this is what we're projecting having unallocated. And then our additional reserve accounts. So per our policies, and we'll keep referring to this magic number of the net general fund operating revenues. So I do want to highlight that as of FY24, that number is about 105 million. So every time I say a percentage based off, 4% of that 8%, this is the magic number that I'll be speaking about. It obviously changes every year as we approve new budgets, but for FY24, which is the most recent number I have, I'll be using the 105 million. So our total target for reserves is 8% of that number, which would be 8.4 million. 4% in what we call the general fund, or as I just went through, that's free cash. The other 4% should be in our stabilization fund. So as of right now, FY24, the target amount based on that 105 is 4.2 million for our stabilization fund. Currently, it is at 3.9 million. So as you recall, each year recently, we've been allocating $125,000 each town meeting from free cash into that account. So this stabilization fund provides for unanticipated or unforeseen extraordinary needs of an emergency nature. It's also a key component of the town's current AAA credit rating, which, as I'll discuss later, helps with when we go out to borrow. We also have a capital improvement stabilization fund. We have not appropriated anything annually through town meeting in the last number of years. The last time anything was appropriated was in FY18. That current fund balance is 1.5 million. And our meals and hotel special purpose stabilization fund, that was set up by town meeting in 2017 as a way to reserve those revenues in a separate account because it should not be utilized for ongoing regular operating costs because it fluctuates each year. As you saw during COVID, those numbers were way down. So we really try to utilize those specific revenue funds for one-time capital assets to supplement our ongoing capital budget process. And as of September 30th, the current balance in that account is 1.3 million. And just as a reference, the last town meeting in May of 2023 we utilized about $1.1 million of meals and hotel tax to fund additional capital articles, which, as I discussed at a previous meeting, was a big part of why the free cash amount was certified so high. Each year we see where we are with the funds. The meals and hotel tax balance had come back up after COVID. So we figured that we had a good enough reserve to fund our ongoing our additional capital through that. So it's something we look at each town meeting to see where the best place for funding is. Tax revenue, I know I say this often, but taxes are approximately 80% of the town's overall revenue. It's the most important component of our financial stability. So the majority of our revenue comes through taxes. Why does that matter? Because we are limited. So we have limits on the total property tax that we can raise as a town. We can only increase each year what's called per proposition 2.5% over the prior year's tax levy plus any new growth. So, and I just want to highlight that calculation is not applied to individual tax bills. It's a limit that's put on our total tax levy of what we can raise each year. So town meeting can approve a debt exclusion, which allows for additional property taxes to be levied. We have two options with that. It's called an override. We may approve through town meeting a general override, which would give additional funds for any purpose, and it also permanently increases the levy limit. I believe Westwood has not had one of those since 2007. What we have had recently is a debt exemption. It's the other option. This is to pay for a specific capital project through annual debt service added to the tax levy. So that is not a permanent increase. Those taxes that are levied end when the bond for that specific project ends. So also, anytime we would do a debt exclusion for a project, and an example was the most recent elementary school project, right? So with that comes, once that approval is given at town meeting, it would require borrowing through debt. So just a very quick overview here. I'll skip through a lot of this, but how do we authorize debt? We go to town meeting, we get authorization for the specific project. You issue the bond. We work with the town treasurer as well as our financial planners. We go out to sale, we receive the money and enter into a repayment schedule. So this is a schedule that I'll show a really quick snapshot later, but it's all of our current bonds that are issued, and we do update that annually, and we keep very close eye on that, and we track it throughout the year, and then it's formally updated annually and given out through our capital budget book. And then we come up with a debt service repayment schedule, and that includes principal and interest payments, and that is included in each year's operating budget. We also have a current repayment schedule that we update formally every year, and that also gets released in the capital budget book, but we also keep an eye on that all throughout the year. So only the debt service schedule to be repaid will be included in that year's budget. And just debt management, again, for our financial policies, which this all goes back to, we have prudent use of debt financing. We take a responsible position on what purpose to borrow, when to schedule debt finance projects, and how long the repayment schedule should be. And we work with our financial advisors on all of that. So I won't get into this, but there are two options of borrowing: short-term, long-term. It all depends on the type of project, the timing of the year, when we're anticipating spending for those projects. But those are the two options for borrowing. Short-term is just, as it sounds, it's a short-term fix, and eventually everything we will go out long-term to borrow for. So the debt service budget, the repayment of that debt service is through general fund revenues. Like I said, principal and interest payments included in each year. This includes what we refer to as exempt and non-exempt debt. So the exempt debt example I'll keep giving is the most recent elementary school project. It's added to the levy limit. It's additional tax revenue raised to pay for that specific debt until that bond is retired. Non-exempt debt is what I sort of refer to. It's within Proposition 2.5. It doesn't require a debt exclusion override. It's within our annual operating budget. It's money set aside through the tax revenue already within our budget. And I want to highlight, which I'll get into next, we target new debt sold to replace old debt dropping off. So when a project's ending and dropping off, we try to bring new projects on, and I'll talk about why that is. And also to highlight, the town has capacity limits which prevent us from using debt to finance all the capital projects that I'm sure we would want to. So debt capacity. The town's debt capacity is governed by what I'm going to refer to here as 4 main factors that all need to be considered when discussing the town's borrowing options and what the plans are. So the amount of debt any government in Massachusetts can incur is limited by a general law. I won't get into it. It's a very large amount. I put the math here just for discussion's sake, but it's 5% of the town's equalized valuation, which for Westwood would equal about $274 million, meaning at any point in time, we are technically authorized by law that we could have that amount in outstanding debt. However, town policies we've gone through with the board, and that's when I talk about debt, prudent debt management, this comes in. So non-exempt debt should not exceed 8% of that magic number, general fund revenues. For FY24, that 8% is $8.4 million. And again, that non-exempt debt I'm talking about is within our operating budget. Total debt, meaning exempt and non-exempt, so all outstanding debt that the town has at any point in time should not exceed 12% of net general fund revenue. And a big part of this is that we need to balance the total debt costs and tax implications with all of the services that the town needs to provide. So for FY24, that 12% of the magic number is $12.6 million. Another thing we have to keep in mind, as I just alluded to, is at the budget, right? So the increased debt service for non-exempt debt can place stress on the operating budget because there's really only one bucket of money and we need to provide appropriate funding for all of the town services. And then, of course, a major one also is the impact on taxpayers. So projects funded with long-term debt that are exempted from Prop 2.5, we should identify the impact on annual tax rate and tax bills due to a debt exclusion before making any decisions. So within Proposition 2.5, aka that non-exempt debt I've been talking about, so the payments each year should not exceed 8% of the net general fund revenue. Right now for FY24, our actual payments this year will come to $3.3 million. So as you can see, we are well within our financial policies. Whenever possible, we'll issue new debt as old debt rolls off. This keeps this budget at an approximately same level. And we also need to remember that within this isn't just large building projects. When we talk about this number, this includes our annual ongoing budget for non-exempt debt that fits in capital equipment needs, you know, such as a large piece of equipment for our DPW that we would need to borrow for. That has to be fit within this.
So Stephanie, just before you leave that one, just
yes.
So what you're saying there is, if we were to actually have projects that borrowed to the max of 8.4 million, the additional 5.1 would need to come from elsewhere in the budget. There would need to be service cuts in order to fit that into that one pie you talked about.
Correct. This does not have what I call dedicated tax revenue, right? And it's not being raised on the tax levy above and beyond. This has to come from that one bucket of money that we have in our operating budget.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. So, and to just sort of highlight what Rob just said, this is why we try to keep this budget as level as possible. This is a chart of the annual payments for the yearly debt service budget of projects borrowed within Prop 2.5, so that non-exempt debt. As you can see, the big jump came in FY17. That's about the time that University Station came online and there was new growth that was added, right? So the town was able to take on 2 pretty large construction projects, the police station and the fire station, within this budget because there was additional new growth. Since then, it's been pretty flatlined. So without that new growth, what we do is we say when a bond rolls off, we bring a new one on. And just to highlight an example of that, in FY23, we had a drop off from a 10-year DPW bond. The last payment was in FY22. So that provided space for a new DPW road bond to be approved. And that first payment was then made in FY24. So it's sort of when I say we keep our budget level, that's what I mean. So a 10-year bond was dropping off. We knew that was coming. We planned accordingly. We started a new one and a new project after that payment was done. So for exempt debt, that budget steadily decreases just to the normally due to the natural decline of debt service. And then also any exempt projects, these are usually long-term, 10, 20, 30 years, any of those rolling off. So those would be the two times that this is, you can see, that is why this budget is sort of going down because of the natural decline of debt. This is for principal and interest payments for projects approved outside of Prop 2.5. Examples, the high school project, the library, and then the most recent elementary school project. And just to give you an idea of that, these are payment amounts for the high school and the library. So that high school big payment ended in FY23. The new payment, which would hit the tax bill, right, it would have an impact on taxpayers, did not hit until FY24. That was strategically done. While it does not absorb the entire amount of the impact, waiting until one project rolled off before bringing on new debt did absorb some of that impact. And then also the town looks to refinance whenever possible, just to keep on top of any savings that we can benefit from. An example of that is that the library was refinanced in April of 2021 with a total savings of about $760,000. So that means that's $760,000 less that we have to raise in taxes, which is a saving to the taxpayers each year of about $75,000 for the remainder of the bond.
Now, Stephanie, I know that I'm asking you to do that, but I imagine if you went back and looked back to the year 2000 or 95, you would have seen a similar sort of declining and fairly steady exempt debt schedule. And then when that high school project was approved, that you would have seen a similar proportional jump here.
Correct. And just remember, this is after, I want to say that bond was 20 years. So this is, you know, towards the tail end of it. So this would have, when it came on, it might have looked just like this green bar at that time, right? So correct, Rob. Yes. I am not going to make you read this. That would just put everyone to sleep for the night. But I'm going to highlight quickly, when I say that we update annually our debt service schedule, this is what I mean. And the only thing I want you to focus on is these boxes. When I say debt rolling off, this is what I mean. It's just highlighting this frees up capacity. As you can see, you know, payments are going along. If you just take a look at this one right here, this land purchase, say, it's slowly declining, and then all of a sudden the payments stop. So we have freed up capacity within that fiscal year. That's sort of just what I'm highlighting here. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. This is our what we call long-term debt outstanding. So this is all projects that have been approved at town meeting and already issued, what we call issued, meaning we went out to bid for them and we have incurred the debt. This is the total amount currently for our general fund outstanding debt as of June 30th of this year, the upcoming year. Again, not something I'll get into too much detail, and I just wanted to give you a snapshot of that. And I think this maybe helps a little bit more. This is a chart of that total amount over the past 7 fiscal years. As you can see, it really became large when we issued the debt for the most recent elementary school project. Before that, it was between about 35 and 40 million, pretty steady. And that's just a graph, a visual aid for you to see. So that jump came on when the school project was issued. And along those lines, as a reminder, the school project has not been fully what we call issued, meaning gone out to bid and borrow long-term for. So this is a list of what we keep track that we have to remember. We have $84 million in outstanding debt currently. However, we also have debt that has been authorized at town meeting, but not issued long-term yet. That includes anything from the school construction, less MSBA reimbursement. I want to point that out. So this number will not be the total amount we have left to borrow, because it will be anything less what we end up getting from MSBA reimbursement, as well as the 2 projects that were approved at town meeting in May of 23. which includes the cemetery expansion and the fire ladder truck. And then also 3 design projects that we've done in 1 year. When I talked about short-term borrowing, that's what I meant. Did a 1-year ban for that. We still have to go long-term for that amount. And this just is me highlighting that at any point in time when we do that debt service schedule that I saw with the little boxes, not everything is even included in that. So we just have to keep in mind that we have to account for everything that we've also authorized at town meeting that we are anticipating borrowing for. And then along those lines, I wanted to try to make this as condensed as possible and really highlight just the important pieces of those fund spreadsheets. This is what I call sort of a highlight of debt capacity and what it means. So when I talk about the roll off of different projects and then the natural decline each year in debt service payments for projects, I tried to have a calculation of what that might mean for the next 6 years. These are estimated numbers, but they're pretty on point with what we have in our current budget. So this is really all the capacity that we have coming up with all the projects we currently have outstanding. I will highlight just a few asterisks here. For FY25, for our non-exempt budget, it's about $300,000. However, as I just said, we have not borrowed long-term for a few projects that were approved at the last 2 annual town meetings that will be within that non-exempt budget. Same for the exempt, right? So that's the projects that are through a debt exclusion. We have not borrowed the full amount for the elementary school construction project. So that amount will be mostly used up for both of those items. And then in the out years for the next 5 fiscal years, any drop off we have is not hugely significant. The next one will be in 2031, when the library project bond comes to an end. And then in 2035, when the Islington fire station bond comes to an end. And as I said earlier, one of the drops is in 2032 for a road bond. However, we already know that we're going to utilize that new capacity with a new road bond. And just to sort of put it in perspective, I wanted to give a highlight of generally what could $100,000 of new capacity fund, right? If we got $100,000 in our debt budget tomorrow, what could that sort of support? And with a lot of assumptions here, 5% interest rate, 30-year term, level debt service, if we went out for a bond, it would provide $100,000 a year would provide the debt service for a $1.5 million bond. So not a large building project, but maybe, a piece of equipment. So then the next couple of slides, I'm going to go over our charts. And the purpose is to show what our current capacity is based on our policies and what it might look like with different scenarios of different capital projects that could be approved at town meeting. So this graph right here shows, I tried to make this as colorful and fancy as possible because I know this is really dense stuff. So this shows the total bar graphs down here are our current annual payments for debt service. The blue is non-exempt, the purple is exempt. As you can see, it's that natural decline. I tried to put with that so that you could see the 2 lines are what our cap is per our policies. So this blue line right here is our non-exempt debt ceiling of 8% of that magic number, right? And then up here is the 12% of the total debt ceiling that each year we should be incurring. And
well, Stephanie, if I'm looking at this, right, yep. You're saying that the green area, you're just basically saying that's our annual budget projected yep. out at 3%. And then the 2 caps grow with that respective budget.
That's exactly correct. So, and as it would, correct? So since it's a percentage of the annual revenue budget, as the budget increases by 3%, these will follow along with that because these caps are percentages of that the magic number, which is our budget growth, really. And as you said, this is an estimate, obviously. It's not always 3%, but just for clarification and just to show that's the number we've assumed. So this is current, right? So as you can see, our total, which is the purple and the blue together, is currently below what we're calling the non-exempt line and the total line. That's what I'll call it for now. What would happen if we went out to borrow in the next couple of years for one project? And these are all example projects I'm just throwing out for topics of conversation. The first one would be $40 million project starting in FY26. And these are all based on 5% interest rate, 30-year terms. So I added it on top of that as the new column. So if it was FY26, those payments would start that fiscal year. It already takes us, as you can see, in the first year alone, over our 8% financial policy cap, which would
But to
mean
be
that
clear,
project.
Right, just to be clear, that green line is only relative to the dark blue bar, right? Because that's your non-exempt cap.
Correct, yes.
Okay, all right. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm tracking with the colors and the lines and the bars and everything. So I just want to make sure I'm tracking with you.
I like that, but I will just say that I want to also look at it as a total number, because again, that budget, when we're really restricted on what we can allocate towards that operating budget, this project alone would put us high enough that we would have to probably think about a debt exclusion, right? So this would be a borrowed project that we might not be able to fit within our current debt budget, non-exempt. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Hopefully.
Well, I would think that would be an exempt item that would bring with it its own incremental funds.
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
So yes, and so where I understood your comment earlier about if that non-exempt debt, the dark blue, were to continue to grow, that's what really puts pressure on the operating budget.
Correct. Yep.
All right. So, okay, continue.
Yep. And then so if we brought on a second project, even if it was a couple of years out, so FY29, I'm sort of staggering these projects to see the impact. It's bringing us closer to this cap up here, right? And that would be a $70 million project, same assumptions. Then if we brought on a third project, you know, I guess I'm also getting at the point that while debt naturally declines as you bring on more projects, even if they're 4 or 5 years separated, it adds up because those payments are now for 30 years. So you're sort of building on top and about to reach that cap. And then if you throw on, I just throw in a fourth project just for the graphic. So that's where it gets us. And please ask any questions about this that you have.
I think this is a really, really helpful illustration to show what the constraints of Prop 2.5 and these common sense policies that we have in place. This gets to, you know, it is one pie.
Yep. And that is the end. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I can turn this off or leave it up, whatever you'd prefer.
I think that was very helpful, Stephanie, especially the graphics. Thank you for doing that. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you, Stephanie.
Stephanie,
Thank
great
you
job.
very much.
Thank you.
Well done.
All
Oh,
right.
and just also, sorry, I will say that I am anticipating giving this same sort of presentation at an upcoming Finance and Warrant Commission meeting on Wednesday night. So if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I think those last few slides will actually help address one of the questions that came up, and it's been one that we've been talking about on the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. So I think those are outstanding, you know, illustrations of where we are.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, moving on. Our next item of new business is ARPA funds and recommendation. And Stephanie or Chris, will you be presenting on this?
I'm happy to present just to discuss with the board. Can someone put up the chart, the upper slide, please? Just so we can give the board the visual.
I can get it. Just give me 1 minute. If you want to start talking, I can pull it up.
So, Madam Chair, while we're waiting for Stephanie, in the interest of time, I can certainly begin that conversation and then we can get that visual aid.
Thank
So
you.
we have three recommendations. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
We have three recommendations for the board this evening regarding the ARPA funds. The first is at a prior board meeting, we asked for a townwide disability audit and an amount of $25,000 coming from our revenue loss category. If the board may recall, the town was fortunate enough to receive a $100,000 grant for an ADA study. So what we're recommending to the board is to rescind that vote and put that $25,000 back into available funds for under the revenue loss category. Thank you, Stephanie. That would be one recommendation that we have. The second recommendation is to use $1.4 million from the revenue loss category for a portion of the fire station design and bid funding. The estimate we received from our feasibility study was a total of 3.5 million. And we can certainly talk about the next 2.1 million at another agenda item that you have right after this. And the third is a municipal and school facility study. This was also discussed at the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. It's also a recommendation from the Long Range Financial Planning Committee for the board to consider conducting such a study, not how it would be funded. Our recommendation is to fund it out of the ARPA account. This would allow for both the town and the school to begin that procurement process earlier. And this would certainly help us out, especially with the timing of some of the things that are going to be happening or could happen next year, at least for the timing of some of the school matters that are being discussed.
Chris, if I may just add to, the discussion that took place before this recommendation was made coming out of long range financial planning. The idea behind this study is, as we look at that type of debt schedule chart that Stephanie just showed, we want to be able to have a good sense of both the need, by going and auditing all of the buildings so that we understand what the need is, what the level of urgency is, and have a better sense as to what costs might be than just sort of last best estimate adjusted for inflation. So that was the logic behind why we wanted to support this recommendation to the select board. And so that's why Chris is bringing this before you this evening.
Thank you, Rob. In addition, the other benefit that we feel the town could benefit from would be having one firm conducting the study for both the town and the school. So the idea would be we would go out, we would look to procure those services. If the firm has the capacity to do both simultaneously, then that's great. But if they don't, then what we talked about is having the school take the lead. And then when they're done with then they have the capacity, they'll come back to the town. So we can split it up. But by having one firm go through the assessment, go through the cost estimation, for both town and school facilities, we thought that would be more beneficial to the town rather than having two, with the potential of having two different ways of calculating that or providing those estimates. If those three recommendations were supported by the board, that would leave under the revenue loss category $89,257. There are many other things that we could talk about, but we thought by having the 1.4 for the fire design and bid as a clean round number would be beneficial. And there's some other things that some of the department heads and I have been discussing that the board could consider using the $89,000 for. But that would also give, like I said, give the board another opportunity to look at some other projects that would not go against the capital funding that we have through our annual process.
Chris, sorry, I'll just add one thing. Also keep in mind with ARPA, there are deadlines for when we have to have these funds. Yes. So this brings us closer to be in line, which our auditors recommended, having projects these are allocated towards.
And as we approach those deadlines, I recall when we had the the Norfolk County folks here for the check presentation down for the School Street Playground. We also said, hey, if anybody doesn't end up using all of theirs, we'll check in with you periodically. We could find a place for them.
Yes, we have reached out to our contact and he's fully aware that we are certainly willing, if the county had additional funding, that they would be willing to share with the town.
Chris, on the rescinding of the disability audit funds, the $25,000, I'm well aware of the grant that we received and the work that's being done there. But have we run this by the Commission on Disability, the rescinding of the 25,000?
I haven't discussed it with the Commission on Disabilities, but like I said, we did receive a grant for 100,000 to do that ADA work. It's still available it's still in that 89,000. So if the board did choose to reallocate that or apply that to a future Commission on Disabilities initiative, we can certainly look into that as well.
Okay, I think I might be more comfortable just waiting on that, just so that we can check in with the Commission on Disability. Given the commitment of those funds, I would feel more comfortable just on that piece, just to delay, to make sure that we're checking with our partners on the COD.
We can certainly do that. So then the recommendation for the board's consideration would be for two items. One would be $1.4 million to fund a portion of the fire station design and bid. And one would be $500,000 for municipal and school facility study.
And just to be clear, Chris, that 1.4 for the portion of the fire station, we would need to make that contingent on approval at the special town meeting, right?
I believe that's correct, Mr. Gotti.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, Madam Chair, are you ready for a motion or are you?
I'm ready.
Is there any other
Thank you.
discussion? Joe, questions? Sorry.
No, I had one question. Chris, I know the answer to this, but just to double check. We have a facilities director. I think his first name is Jim. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and he'll be heavily involved with this survey?
Yes.
Great. I'm all set, Robert. Thank you.
All right, Rob, well, I'll entertain the motion.
Okay, I would move the select board authorize the use of $500,000 of our ARPA funds. I just want to make sure that they're coming from the right place for our revenue loss category of our ARPA funds for a municipal and school facilities study. We want to do these as two separate motions.
Yes,
I
please.
think you should.
Very good. Okay, so that's motion number one.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
All right.
I vote aye as well.
Okay, and then I would vote or move that the select board vote to approve the use of 1.4 million in revenue loss from our American Rescue Plan ARPA funds to pay the costs associated with designing, preparing, and obtaining construction bid documents for Fire Station 1, contingent upon the 2024 special town meeting vote to appropriate the remaining funding needed.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. That brings us to an initial discussion of warrant articles. Chris, I'll turn this back to you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So we have three articles right now. We have one, the fire station design and bid document funding. The estimate, again, in the feasibility report was 3.5 million. With the action of the board at the prior vote, the remaining balance that we will be recommending for the board's consideration will be $2.1 million of free cash. In addition to the $1.4 million, that would give us the $3.5 million for the design bid for the fire station. The other article, the second article is a debt housekeeping article. And that is to abandon a prior vote in the amount of $400,000 and then to reapply that funding to an existing project. And Stephanie, please correct me if I'm wrong, an existing project that has yet to go out to long-term borrowing. Is that right?
That is the plan. Yep, we would work with our bond counselor and our financial advisors to determine where we could reallocate those funds to. It would not be for a project that has not been approved by a town meeting. And we would strategically work to identify a project for that.
And the third article is a miscellaneous article. And as the board's aware, we will be working with the board and preparing final recommendations for the board at your December 4th meeting, which will also be 2 days before the public hearing that FinCom has scheduled for the special town meeting.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So I think we should take a vote to accept these in this form.
Do we need to vote on that tonight?
Madam Chair,
should we
I
defer?
would just recommend that we're just still making sure we're dotting our i's and crossing our t's, speaking with bond counsel to make sure, and town council to make sure we have the final language for you, and our plan is to have that for you at your fourth meeting.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. Anything further, Joe, Rob? On that? Okay. I'm going to suggest, as to our next item on the agenda, just reviewing meeting dates for 2024. I'm going to suggest that we defer that to our next meeting, given the length of this meeting. So our next agenda item is approval of our minutes from our October 23rd, 2023 meeting. Does anyone have any changes, edits, additions? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I have no changes to the last round of what I saw, so I move that the minutes from our select board meeting on October 23rd, 2023 be approved as submitted.
Second.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you. That brings us to public and press. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I will give it a moment. I am not seeing any other public comments, although we appreciate those that were made during the course of the meeting. With that, I will announce that our next meeting will be on Monday, December 4th, 2023 at 6 p.m. on Zoom. And with that, the board will be going into executive session to discuss two potential issues. The first, pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A1, to discuss the reputation, character, physical condition, or mental health rather than professional competence of an individual, or to discuss the discipline or dismissal of or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual. And the second, pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to discuss strategy with respect to contract negotiations for non-union personnel. Discussion of either in public would have a detrimental effect on the position of the governing body. The board will not be returning to open session.
I would move that we move to executive session for all the aforementioned reasons.
Second.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night.